If the sound works fine, I'm going to start. I'm sorry, I have a bit of a bug, which means I'm basically not seeing the participants and anyone move. So I'm really sorry for this. I'm going to do my little welcome, and then I'll try and solve this during the first presentation. So please let us know in the Q&A if things are bugging, and I'll start and I'll stop. But otherwise it's 10:03 now, so I really need to start because we have a tight deadline today. So welcome everyone. This webinar is a webinar on sufficiency, energy sufficiency, as the missing driver on the way to carbon neutrality in catching up economies. I'm Stéphane Bourgeois, I'm the European Relations and Policies Manager at the négaWatt Association. I previously worked in Morocco for GIZ and in Brussels. And you may know from there, this webinar is organized in the context of the REKK funded CACTUS project, which we'll tell you a little bit more about and which I coordinate. We're also in the framework of the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue, and really happy if guests are coming from that. And we thank you for the week for the ones who've been in Berlin, at least online. So we hope you enjoyed it, and we're happy to have you with us today. Technically, if everything works well, recording is on, which means that the session will be put online and the slides sent to you. If you don't really want to be too visible, just don't be. We have, for now, I see 44 participants, which means it could be a very cozy workshop, or maybe a too big workshop. So we have a webinar format, which means, unfortunately, we can't see you, but we can see your names. We can see what you write in the chat, the discussion box. The difference between that and the Q&A session is the discussion box is if you want to share stuff with everyone. If you want to ask questions during the presentations, then just ask questions in the Q&A box. Clarification questions will be taken during or just after the presentations, and we'll also try and answer the questions that are easy to solve, but we'll try and keep the most exciting or the biggest ones for the Q&A session that we have at the end, which is also why I need to move on a little bit. So I wanted to start this session today with the first slide on trends. Can you put the first lens? I wanted to show you what's been happening with asteroids in the world, and this has really been increasing in the past years. And the link with sufficiency is pretty clear. But in fact, this is just my April's fool. I was actually joking. So just be careful. Don't look up. I'm going to start a real teaser. So please, next slide. The next slide is a pretty relevant slide for what we want to talk about today. It's the average consumption of cars in Europe. I could just stop there and show you that, well, you probably know this, efficiency policies with cars have been pretty efficient in Europe. This is stuff from the EEA. But you'll see in the next slide or in the next animation that actually because there are more and more cars in Europe, and because distance traveled with those cars are longer and longer, in fact, the reality is that the fuel consumption of cars is rather stable or almost increasing. So this is really what we want to deal with today. The lack of sufficiency policies neutralizes the effect and the success of efficiency policies, which is why I want to talk to you about this in the context of CEE countries. And quickly, I'll show you the agenda today. So we have quite a nice representation of the partners involved in the CACTUS project. We will start with my colleague Yves Marignac, Head of Analysis in négaWatt Association France. He'll give you an insight into sufficiency, the concepts, our experience in France with modeling it, and he'll also introduce you the CACTUS project in the context. We will then go into the depth of some of the work we've been doing in CACTUS to look at sufficiency in catching up economies in the buildings and transport sections with Inga Konstantinavic-Uite and with Maria Mott-Bartek-Lessy. And then we will have Masa Bagheri from Fraunhofer ISI, who will give you very concrete examples of policies that are already in place in Germany. Finally, we're very happy to have with some really involved or close to the CACTUS project, but who is working on these issues at an international level. This is Yamina Saheb, who's a lead author of the UN IPCC Working Group 3 report, extremely busy at the moment because, as you know, the report on mitigation is to be published on Monday. So we're really happy that she can give us a bit of an international perspective and react a little bit to what's been discussed. We hope to have 20 to 25 minutes for a Q&A session at the end, and we will conclude at sharply 11:30 because we'd like you to continue with the other sufficiency session of BTD. So there you go. The floor is now to Yves Marignac. I don't know if I need to introduce Yves. Yves has been working with négaWatt for quite some time now. I don't know if it's 20 years, and he's our head of analysis. He's got quite a bit of experience on integrating sufficiency into modeling, but he's also working on broader issues such as nuclear issues in France. Yves, the floor is yours. If Yves is with us.
Yeah, thank you very much. And maybe I should start with a very quick word on négaWatt, just to be precise that it's a group of experts with more than 1,500 members now, which has been developing since 20 years scenarios to reach climate and deep sustainability objectives for France, and is proposing policies and measures based on this. We've been working a lot on energy sufficiency, and the energy sufficiency first principle, and I'm just going to illustrate what we mean by that through a very kind of classical energy chain. Next, please, Mathilde, thank you. Starting with an energy resource and getting down to a use of this energy. So in that case, the energy resource is oil, which means it needs to be refined. If we want to get to some electric use of it, it needs to go through a power plant and through an electricity grid, down to the final energy that is delivered to the end user, and that is the useful energy used in the converter. But we emphasize that we need to go a bit further and think about the conditions of designing and dimensioning, in that case, light appliances. And finally, on the far end of this slide, the conditions of use are important. In that case, a very efficient light bulb with a very well-designed lamp, but very bad conditions of use, of course. So this brings us really to think of sufficiency first as an attention to be paid on the level and dimensioning and priorities of energy services. And once we've done this work on sufficiency, we can think about efficiency and reducing losses all along the chain, and finally get to primary resources and to substitution by renewables. This attention on sufficiency brings us to think about limits and equality issues, and we are very much using the donut economy concept for that, which brings us to think about sufficiency in between two boundaries. First of all, the ceiling, which means sound collective levels, the ecological limits beyond which living conditions are threatened, but also a foundation of decent life levels, bringing to everyone the social minimums of energy services below which life in society is degraded. So we are really thinking about sufficiency, not only in terms of reducing demand, but reducing the overall demand while reinforcing solidarity and redistribution of this access to energy services. So our in-house definition of energy sufficiency is that it aims at fulfilling everyone's needs for energy services while adjusting their nature and their amount in order to keep energy demand at a level which does not endanger the carrying capacity of our environment and the Earth. We've been thinking a lot about the leverages that could be used to implement sufficiency towards energy services, and to also think about how energy sufficiency could be characterized and discussed. Yeah, thank you. Not only, I mean, it's more difficult than efficiency, for instance, because it's less easy to quantify, but one can really, from a very individual to very collective level, think about the hierarchy of the uses we are making of energy and resources. And as long as we can put those priorities, it is possible to think about regulations and to think about policies and measures. Next. Yeah, to think about policies and measures that could regulate the level of energy services that are delivered to end users. We have further thought about the different leverages that could deliver on this sufficiency, starting with the end user end of the energy chains, and leverages that deal mostly with the level of service that is delivered, the intensity and duration of use of equipments. But we very much emphasize that this is not enough. And then one needs to also address more dimensioning issues like the size or nominal capacity of equipment, including, and that are obviously very big issues, including the size of buildings, the size of vehicles. And even further, we identified the need for a more organizational sufficiency that deals with collective sharing, collective transports, or co-working places, for instance, and collective planning, including, for instance, urban planning to reduce distances that people need to cover. All this brings us to, again, think of possible policies and measures that are able to address, to deliver on those different sufficiency leverages. But on top of it, this really is important to realize that sufficiency needs some changes in infrastructures that go well beyond the level of simply so-called change of behavior. Next. When it comes to the modeling approach, we are using a model, we've been using for long a model that sticks to our approach, starting with energy demand and going upwards to the supply side, which allows for us to identify the level of demand for energy services. And we've been working with indicators of this energy services, like square meters of building per person or kilometers covered per person per year. These indicators allow for identifying potentials. These potentials are helping to discuss policies that could deliver on tapping them. Policies bring assumptions, and these assumptions can be translated into changes in the indicators. And altogether, we really are convinced that building energy sufficiency assumptions in the model and in scenarios is actually working exactly the same as for other assumptions on efficiency or energy substitution. When it comes to the implementation of sufficiency as demonstrated or as projected through our scenario, this is an illustration on the role of sufficiency in reducing energy demand in sectors in our latest scenario for France by 2050. Altogether, sufficiency accounts for roughly 20% of the drop in final energy demand. And this, of course, very much contributes to our scenario to meeting net zero carbon footprint objectives, and also to reducing the overall primary materials footprints and delivering on the other benefits. Next. Finally, we really consider sufficiency as a key enabler, first to improve the pace and the range of energy substitution by reducing the amount of resources that is needed. Secondly, to deliver on positive co-benefits when it comes to environmental and health impacts. And finally, to help building resilience towards shocks, which of course is very much important considering the current crisis, especially with the situation in Ukraine. We've been doing all that work in the French context, and we are now really keen on developing the same attention and the same thinking about sufficiency in other contexts. And that is the purpose of the CACTUS project, which is about energy sufficiency and its integration into climate and energy strategies in the Central and Eastern European context of catching up economies. This project is about an exploratory work in Lithuania and Hungary, which started with the status quo of the energy sufficiency in this national context, and a technical dialogue on integrating sufficiency and identifying sufficiency potentials, which is what this webinar, which will mostly focus about, and discussing how this could be integrated in models and therefore scenarios to inform policymakers. I'm just ending it here to leave the floor to more contents from our Hungarian and Lithuanian colleagues on this project. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Yves. Yeah, for this insightful and dense presentation. We're a little bit behind time, and I'm responsible, or at least the IT issues at the beginning. But yeah, let's try and stick to the time we have. So I'll be brief, but I still want to quickly introduce Maria Bartek-Lissi, who's Senior Research Associate at REKK, the REKK Foundation in Hungary, and she's been there since 2004, and before that was working at the Central European University, the Corvinus University, and the Energy Regulatory Office of Hungary. Maria is mostly engaged in projects related to renewable energy and climate policy. Inga Konstantinaviciūtė is Chief Research Associate in the Lithuanian Energy Institute. She's been working there already for 20 years and is mostly studying energy demand forecasting, energy sector planning, analysis of energy and indicators and environmental issues of the energy sector, and also some work on policies and measures. Both will, as Yves said, he made the perfect transition, so I don't need to tell you more. They'll give you an insight on what we've been doing in CACTUS, maybe not so much on the modeling part, but on the step before the modeling, on how do we try to create assumptions, to work towards assumptions with the work on sufficiency target levels on key sufficiency indicators in the local context. So the floor is yours, and it's Maria who starts.
Thank you, Stefan. Shortly, just some words about the REKK, the Regional Center for Policy Research, my institution. It provides analysis and advice related to the electricity and gas sectors, and also the heating and water supply sectors in Hungary and also in Europe, extending also its activities worldwide recently. We built up the Times model for Hungary, which provided the scenario projections for the Hungarian National Energy and Climate Plan and the long-term strategy as well. In this presentation, we will provide with my Lithuanian colleague Inga an insight in our research on sufficiency potentials in Hungary and in Lithuania. And our goal with this research was to explore whether a sufficiency potential exists in the residential buildings and transport and passenger transport sectors in these countries, and to see how they can be incorporated into our existing scenario models. In this presentation, we will show you our approach to this analysis, explaining the initial phase actually of our research, in which we determine the sufficiency targets for 2050 for some basic indicators. As the outline shows here, First, I will show some basic information about the two countries, then present the process of setting 2050 sufficiency targets for some indicators in these sectors. Then both of us will demonstrate this process for some key indicators in the two sectors mentioned, during which we will show some historic trends of energy use in these sectors. We will provide an overview of the key selected indicators, and then show the method of setting sufficiency targets for some of them. And finally, we will show some policy options that can bring about demand decrease in these sectors. Here you can see some basic data about the countries in focus. Both countries are Central European countries, post-socialist countries. As you can see, the GDP per capita in the two countries, the figures that you can see here, compared to the 30,000 euros per capita of the EU. But actually, if you look at the per capita GDP measured in purchasing power parity, sorry, which takes into account the differences in price levels as well, then the differences are not so high. The Lithuania's per capita GDP is about 87%, while Hungary's is about 74% of the European average. But actually, we have to mention that energy poverty is still a problem in both countries. In Lithuania, according to the statistics, 28% of the households are not able to keep their homes adequately warm. In Hungary, this number is much lower, it's about 6%, but actually the rate of households having arrears on utility bills is quite high, it's 29%, which means that in Hungary, they heat their homes, but they postpone paying. As regards the composition by fuel, sorry, I'm still at this slide. Just wanted to show very quickly that if you look at the composition of fuel, we can see that oil and gas, natural gas, represent high shares in both countries. A huge share of which comes from Russia, more in Hungary than in Lithuania. Thank you. And then the next slide, please. This figure, which was stolen from CACTUS, illustrates very well our process of estimating the targeted sufficient consumption levels for 2050, which was the starting point in our investigation. It was a bottom-up approach, and in the first stage, we identified and selected some key indicators that could be used for to elaborate our sufficiency assumptions. We used those qualitative sufficiency indicators for which we could find data and which could be integrated into our scenario models relatively easily. Secondly, we carried out a literature review, which involved a collection of sufficient levels for energy service consumption in the literature, basically mostly relying on those pathway analyses, which consider the 1.5 degree decarbonization pathways and aimed to avoid large-scale artificial carbon dioxide removal technologies. The different values, what you could find in the literature, resulted in quite wide ranges of possible values. So what we had to do is to review and to look at the assumption of drivers and the assumptions drivers that could bring about these values, and also the enabling policies to see whether they can be relevant also in our national contexts. This was done by considering the historical trends in our countries and future projections for each indicator, and analyzing how they fit into the local social, cultural, and economic context. And then based on this analysis, we proposed sufficiency target levels for 2050 for both countries, and some of those we will show you later on. Yes, now I will turn to the buildings. The first, next slide, please. Here you can see two figures about the evolution of residential energy consumption in the two countries. Actually, residential energy consumption constitutes 30%, over 30% of the final energy consumption in Lithuania and 27% in Hungary. And the 70% of this consumption is due to the heating of buildings, residential buildings. Total consumption, which can be seen on the left-hand side, with 2010 made equal to 100%, shows that the total consumption decreased by about 10% in both countries due to energy efficiency improvements. And the absolute value of per capita energy consumption, what you can see on the right-hand side, exceeds the EU average in Hungary, but it decreased by some percentages in the last decade, while in Lithuania, it is below the European average in spite of the fact that it, and below the Hungarian values, in spite of the fact that it lies to the north from Hungary, so probably more heating energy is required. Thank you. Next slide, please. This table shows just a snapshot of some important indicators what we analyzed. For example, the average household size, average floor area, average size of dwellings, and the needs for energy for hot water and cooking. You can see the theoretical sufficient target levels, ranges, and the base year values and the assumed levels for 2050 for Lithuania and Hungary. From these, I will pick the average household size and average floor area per capita and show the process of selecting the targets for them in the next slides. First, you can see some trends about these indicators, and also one value which is very important and has a large influence on these indicators, which is the population. You can see that it reduced in both of the countries, and according to the projection, actually they will reduce further until 2050. The bar chart on the right figure compares the average household size in 2010 and 2020. And you can see that actually the average household size fell in almost all countries in the EU, so it can be perceived as a general trend. And this happened also in our countries. And the figure below presents the change in the floor area per person in the 4 project participant countries, showing that the values for Hungary and Lithuania are below those in France and Germany, but all of these values are increasing over time. A recent study of the European Environmental Bureau, of which Yamina was also main author, has shown that the largest increases in the per capita floor area can be observed in the wealthiest countries, with the increase in wealth, the per capita, the average floor area also increases. The EU average is 38%. Thank you. Next one. And this figure shows how we were thinking about the average household size and how we set the sufficiency target level for 2050. As I said previously, the average household size decreased in Hungary and Lithuania, similarly to our, other countries, and the number of households increased. This trend is assumed to continue in our countries due to the demographic and social changes, the increasing number of households without children, and also the number of households, single households, is increasing. But and we can see that the theoretical potential found in the literature is quite ambitious, 4 people per household. And we thought that these demographic changes are quite difficult to change, but if we assume that some policies will be introduced that can hold the decrease, then the numbers can stay at around the European average, which is 2.3%. right now. Thank
Maria,
you.
I just want to let you know that you're quite above time.
Sorry.
11 minutes.
Okay.
So maybe you can just,
I will then just skip the next slide, if it's possible, and get to the last one.
Yes.
Here you can see some, you can see the slides later on for yourself, how we thought about the other indicator. And here you can see just some policy options for the building sector, which can bring about decrease in demand. I will not go into this deeply now because I would like to give the word to Inga then. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I will continue on the transport sector because we share those two sectors between us. So as you can see from those slides, the economic development in catching up economies, of course, is faster than EU average in terms of GDP and energy consumption in transport sector. As presented by Maria, Lithuania and Hungary are quite different countries, but from historical trend during 2005 and 2018, we can see that while the GDP grew only by 20% in EU on average countries, the increase in Hungary was 29% and in Lithuania even 48%. So the growth of GDP has been accompanied by the faster growth of energy consumption and transport. And the increase in final energy consumption was quite moderate in EU countries, but was quite steep in both countries of Hungary and Lithuania. In Hungary, energy consumption increased by 26% and in Lithuania by 55%. So if the EU economies demonstrated some decoupling of GDP and energy consumption, so in our countries was not the case. So of course, the energy consumption growth in transport led to very significant growth of greenhouse gas emissions in both countries, and in Lithuania even by 50%. So, and the biggest share of all transport greenhouse gas emissions comes from the road transportation. So this evolution of consumption, of course, is not in line with the energy and climate objectives. So it is relevant to question the energy sufficiency potential for changing those trends. Next slide, please. So we applied the same methodologies for the buildings, the same for the transport, and we selected the 8 sufficiency indicators. 2 is related with number of persons per car and cars per capita, and all other are showing the passenger kilometer by different transport modes. Next slide, please. So if we take a look to sufficiency relevant passenger transport trends, so we can see that since 2014, the traveling distances started to increase by 5% in Lithuania and by 3% in Hungary. And the main driver of this increase in traveling is improving living standards. And if you take a look to the model split, so we can see that the share of cars in total passenger transport was the highest in Lithuania, is 91% in 2019. And also in Hungary is increasing, and in 2018 it reached 72%. Next slide. What the 2050 sufficiency target level for the total passenger kilometer can be? So we assume that by 2050, the total transport demand could decrease in both countries compared to 2017 and reached about 15,000 passenger kilometers per capita. This assumption was based on our estimations for the different transport modes. And I would like to show also only 2 examples regarding the car or and buses. But of course, the sufficiency in transport sector can be reached via inducing the modal shift, mitigating traffic, and reducing demand for the transportation. Next slide. So the share of cars in total passenger transport is the highest, and analysis of historical trends showed that although both countries have own characteristics, the common feature is that number of cars per inhabitant in both countries is increasing much more faster than on EU average. So the next slide. So the cars will remain the main transport mode in distance, and the distance traveling by cars will increase. And this assumption was based on the assumption that passenger kilometers per capita in long distance journey will increase further, but the car traffic in cities can be mitigated through the policies promoting, of course, the public transports of mobility, car sharing, and so on. Next slide. Because the attractiveness of public transport is considerably lower in Lithuania than EU, the situation in Hungary is quite different. But we also can see here the shift towards the less sustainable travel modes. And we can see that since 2010, the passenger kilometer by bus is increasing in both countries by 2% per year. So next slide, our assumption was also that passenger distances traveling by bus will increase in the future, but the public transport need to be encouraged in both countries, applying the different policy options. And the main, next slide please, the main role for in order to reduce the demand and to shift to non-motorized and less polluting transport mode, the main role should be played by education, awareness raising, and information campaigns. And of course, infrastructure development is quite important in order to ensure the model shift. Also, we analyzed the very different policy options like the car taxation, congestion fees, road tolls, and so on, also financial support for the switching to eco-friendly transport. So we can see that various policy options can be put in place in order to facilitate energy sufficiency in the passenger transport. But at the end of my presentation, I also would like to mention and to stress that the values which we are presenting is the first assumption, and of course it's necessary to further investigate through the analysis of possible policies and impact of those policies. And those indicators can be integrated to our models for energy sector development in order to estimate what the scale of possible savings sufficiency can bring to our countries, both in terms of energy consumption and the carbon emissions. That's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Inga, for catching up the time also. And thanks, Maria, thanks to both of you for this insight into what we've been doing in CACTUS. I'll tell you later, but there will be much more about what we've done afterwards on integrating those into modeling. We'll have some reports on this. You'll be able to know more about this in our next CACTUS sessions. But you made already quite a good transition into the presentation that's coming, which is from Masa Bagheri at the Fraunhofer ISI Institute. Masa will go into a very concrete level of the existence of the existing policy instruments that are in place and that have been put in place in Germany to favor sufficiency, particularly at the local level. So Masa, the floor is yours, and if you manage to also catch up with time, that's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. Yeah, okay. Maria and Inga already showed us some policy options from the transport and building sector. These options could be basically implemented at different levels, EU or member states or regional, local level. The examples that I'm going to show you are the good practice examples that are promoting sufficiency, but they're mainly implemented at the local level. They've been initiated by institutions or all implemented by citizens. Next one, yeah, thank you. When we talk about sufficiency in the building sector, of course, the floor area of the buildings plays an important role, and an important action is to minimize or to optimize the floor area. One way to do that is to adjust the space to our needs. A trend that we see in the housing sector is that when the families grow, they move to a larger place, but when they get smaller again, like when the children move out, they don't go back to the smaller flats. So what we see is usually the large houses, large flats where only 1 or 2 people are living. There was a project from REKK Institute in Germany when they offered consulting sessions to the landlords, mainly older landlords, to give them some information about the options that they had for their places, so to sell them, to divide them, or to rent them out. Next, please. One option to rent out the spaces is to share it with, for example, a student. There is this project in Germany, Housing for Help, which is quite popular, especially in the student cities, where a landlord can offer a room or a part of their place to a student. So it's a win-win option, a win-win program where the students will have to pay a little amount of money for the rent, and in return they will help the landlords in their daily life and where they need the support. This adjustment of space to the needs is also relevant for the tenants. There in the cities of Düsseldorf and Berlin, there are platforms for exchanging houses and flats where the tenants can offer their existing flats, and they can also look for more suitable flats for their families. But of course, such exchanges is only possible if the landlords are also agreeing with this. Next one, please. One other important action is setting the limit, especially in the new buildings. These projects are providing funding schemes to construction or modifications of the buildings, but they're only providing funding if a certain limit for the living area is met. For example, in one of them, the single apartment is not allowed to be larger than 30 square meters. Next one, please. And if we talk about sufficiency in the transport sector, reducing share of private cars is an important action. One platform which is supporting that and promoting that is Stadtmobil in Germany, which is then promoting the use of shared cars. They're offering a really good customer service and a large variety of cars and vehicles that the users can choose from. There's a program in Heidelberg. The city of Heidelberg is promoting the use of public transport instead of private cars. They're offering free annual public transport subscription for people who are giving up their cars. Next one, please. Sometimes also cargo bikes could be a good replacement for private cars. The same program from Heidelberg is also supporting the purchase of a cargo bike or a trailer for people who are deregistering their car. There is also a project in Berlin, which is offering cargo bikes in several spots of the city where people can lend them when they need it. And of course, bikes could be also a good replacement of the private cars when possible. Next Bike platform is offering that. It's making that possible by offering easily accessible free-floating bikes, which they also offering a really good customer service. Next one, please. These practices that I was talking about, they're not only limited to transport and building sector, they could be also seen in a lot of other areas. One of them is about products and appliances and what that we can use in our homes. Some projects are aiming at extending the lifetime of the products by promoting reusing and repairing them. Some are promoting avoiding of buying the new appliances, especially the appliances that are rarely used in the households, by offering platforms for sharing and lending them. The concept of unpacked shops is also getting popular in a lot of cities where the idea is to reduce the packaging and to promote the zero waste. Next one, please. So I just showed some examples from different sectors. There are the examples that are existing in Germany, but of course they can be also found in other member states. They all offer a really great diversity of initiatives, very good ideas and large potentials, but they're still a niche market, maybe apart from some concepts like car sharing or bike sharing. So there's still a lack of framework to support these actions. And to conclude on what I just presented in these few slides is that still a comprehensive and ambitious strategy is missing in terms of sufficiency. There is still a need to recognize sufficiency as an important lever for sustainable lifestyle, and with that to reach the climate neutrality. There is still a lack of policies at the national on the national agenda, from project approach to the small scale project approach to large initiatives and national programs. And although some actions have already started, but there's still a need to include sufficiency policies in the policy framework. Thank you. That was from my side.
Thanks a lot, Masa, also for you to help with catching up with time. We're almost back to time. And for this very nice and concrete overview. And as you said, these are very local initiatives. And I guess in Germany and a lot of countries for now, there has been a lack of real political will at the national level to put the policies and the infrastructure forward that is needed to promote all of this. But let's see if this changes in the a bit dramatic, but existing current context of what's happening to our east. Let's see also what is happening on this at the international stage. As I said, we're really happy that Yamina Saheb, who's deep in the final negotiations, I suppose, on the Working Group 3 report on climate change mitigation, as she's writing the demand section, the building section of the demand section. I suppose you know that this is coming out on Monday and will entail quite some interesting and relevant stuff for the discussions here. I'm not sure Yamina will be able to tell us much about this because we'll have to wait for Monday, I guess, but definitely Yamina has something to say about the issue today. She's been analyzing international scenarios on this and policies with the sufficiency in buildings focus for quite some time now. She's also been working with the IEA previously and with the JRC, the Joint Research Center in Europe. So Yamina, we're keen to hear from you. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Stefan. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the organizers for having me here. I don't know, Stefan, do you have my slides or will you share the screen? I share my screen. Okay. So as mentioned by Stefan, I spent the last years looking to sufficiency in policies, scenarios, and mainly in scientific publications. And unfortunately, I don't have very good news from this perspective. Sufficiency is not new. The concept is not new at all. It appeared for the first time in policy document in 1997 in Thailand. They developed a philosophy of sufficiency economy. And then I don't know much about how it has been implemented. There is not much in the literature and I cannot read Thai, the Thai language. So I don't know much about how it evolved in Thailand. However, the second time it appeared in policy document was in 2015 in the French energy transition law. And I keep saying that if sufficiency would have been a kid, so sufficiency would be today 25 years in policy document. And if it would have been kid, it would have been a young adult who has already a job, most likely has a job and maybe his own flat and building his own family. But this did not work like that for sufficiency. So let's look at why it did not work like that. From a science perspective, sufficiency appeared first in early 2000. It was from energy perspective. It was Wolfgang Sachs, a German researcher, who considered sufficiency as an important pillar. Who considered energy sufficiency and not sufficiency as an important pillar for the energy transition. And for some reason, it did not fly in Germany. However, it did fly. It crossed the border, and it did fly in the civil society in France, and we owe this to négaWatt Association. The NGO has developed scenarios, it is this NGO that brought sufficiency to the policy debate in France, and this is how sufficiency has been included, energy sufficiency, sorry, has been included in the French energy transition law. But the most comprehensive scientific work on sufficiency was published by Thomas Princeton in 2005, and he his book is just, the title is just great. It's The Logic of Sufficiency. And Wolfgang Sachs said about the book when he has read it that when you read that, you forget about efficiency. You stop talking about efficiency. But unfortunately, we are not yet there. So let's go to the next slide, and I will show you where we are from science in sufficiency. So before that, so based on the literature I reviewed in the last 3 years, there are around 360 publications that include sufficiency measures, but they don't always label them as sufficiency. So that's why it was very, very difficult to build database of the scientific publication related to sufficiency. But importantly, based on the most important points from all these publications, or what is common, is that sufficiency policies are the policies that avoid the demand. I highlighted here the main points from all this literature. And I heard during this webinar, and we always hear about energy sufficiency, but actually sufficiency goes beyond energy to include materials demand, land, water, and other natural resources. And the other important point, in addition to avoiding the demand, is these two boundaries. And one of the boundaries, the lower boundary, is about delivering well-being for all, and the upper boundary is within planetary boundaries. And in the case of energy and resources, it would be the carbon budget, the remaining carbon budget. And in the case of well-being for all, is to ensure that everyone in this planet has access to decent living standards, decent housing, decent mobility, etc. If you go to the next slide, please. So when we look at publications, I told you scientists for some reason have ignored sufficiency and keep ignoring sufficiency. So this is the progress that we see by searching in scientific databases like Scopus, which is one of the largest databases. Then you see that the number of publications that uses the word sufficiency is quite limited, and it's only in the recent years, but the number is increasing. But really, can we be satisfied with 14 publications mentioning sufficiency explicitly? This is far from being satisfactory. And if you go to the next slide, when you look at modelings, it's even more shocking, because there are around 700 global scenarios that are Paris compatible. Being Paris compatible, this means that these scenarios aim at temperature targets between 1.5 and 2 degrees by the end of the century. Out of these 700 global scenarios, this is a huge 700 global scenarios. There are only 4 that include sufficiency-related assumptions. But importantly, in these 4 scenarios, out of these 4, we have only 2 that say that this is sufficiency measure. So the word sufficiency does not appear in all the scenarios, low energy demand scenarios. And today we have narratives, people developing narratives about low energy demand scenarios without including the word sufficiency. And if you go to policy recommendations, so this now is becoming famous. It's from the International Energy Agency. It's the 10 plan to cut oil use, which is very, very similar, very close, or modernized and updated, an updated emergency response, oil emergency response, compared to the one from the 70s. And what we see here, the green part, all what is in green are sufficiency measures. But the word sufficiency does not appear at all in the narratives related to this plan. And you see that efficiency and fuel shift, which is the last one, the red 0.1%, there's 0.1, these are percentage, no, these are percentages. No, not percentages, these are absolute figures. Is from efficiency and fuel shift. So we see that from climate perspective, but also from energy dependency perspective, sufficiency should be first. But we are not there, and I hope that with your project and other ongoing projects today on sufficiency, that sufficiency will be mainstreamed in science and mainstreamed in scenarios, to make sure that it will be included in policy recommendations, and to make sure later on that it will be included in recommendations. The only thing that we should keep in mind is that there is not much time left to be lazy intellectually and to continue continue the debate about do we need sufficiency? And one of the things that I noticed recently is that there are people who work on demand reduction, do not feel comfortable with the word sufficiency for I don't know which reason, and they try to dilute sufficiency in efficiency, and this is the worst thing that could happen for both efficiency and sufficiency, because these are two distinct concepts. Efficiency is about the first principle of thermodynamics. Sufficiency is about the second principle of thermodynamics, and to make our economies and our systems working, we need both the first and the second principle of thermodynamics. Over to you, and happy to take questions.
Whoa, thank you, Yamina. It's very, very inspiring presentation, and also for completely catching up. I think we're now even ahead of the originally planned time, which is really great. It's great to see that, well, that this has been there for a long time. I am a bit more hopeful than you, but you're also a little bit hopeful that things are moving. And I think it's, you know, what the IEA has just published is quite amazing, despite the fact that they don't want to use the word yet, but that will come. We're here to do this. I guess we have now 25 minutes for Q&R session. I didn't see many questions. I saw some here. I'm seeing some. We can continue here in the written format. If I don't see any questions, I'll also give you the possibility to raise your hand and you'll be able to talk or to ask your question in writing. I don't know if Yves, you're apparently responding to the questions by Jean-Sébastien Brock. I don't know if you want to do that orally. Yeah, and if you do that, then I can look at the other questions.
Yeah, I can. And thank you for these first questions. And I might also have a question for Yamina if, if no more questions come. No, Jean-Sébastien asked questions about the policies and measures and regulations. First, about the need for policies that address not only changes through regulations and constraints on end users, but deeper changes in social norms and so on. And I mean, it's true. I mean, this is also a reason why I emphasized that this is not only about like behavior change on the end user side, but that sufficiency needs more deeper changes in infrastructures, both hard infrastructures and soft infrastructures. And I mean, we see some changes in hard infrastructures, and for instance, the development of cycling lanes, which proves to be very effective in developing a modal shift towards cycling in dense areas. We see less policies that explicitly address the soft infrastructures, and especially the level of social norms. It's, I mean, it deals with cultural change, so it's obviously difficult, and we probably need. I mean, we need to get out of the vicious circle that Yamina also described. I mean, which is that, I mean, sufficiency policies, sufficiency changes, and the and positive imaginary, positive representations about it are not developed, and therefore they don't get into scientific modeling, scenario building work, and therefore they don't translate into policies, and therefore policies don't address this change of representations about sufficiency. So we need to somehow break that vicious circle and build a virtuous circle about it. And I mean, I can see some changes coming from that perspective, some examples of sufficiency delivering. but we need to do that faster. And as Jean-Sébastien emphasized, I mean, it's also up to the cultural world, to writers, to novelists, to people that do scenarios for series and so on, to develop sufficiency-related positive representations. The second question was about more specifically about the role of advertising in promoting this. This overconsumption patterns that are still in place and that prevent sufficiency to be more explicitly developed. And he referred to the example of the case of SUVs, which is a very good example illustrated by your first slide, Stéphane, of this advertising, this very nocive advertising effect. He pointed to the fact that the Citizen Climate Convention in France very much emphasized the need to much more regulate advertising, and that the French government did not respond to the right level to this demand, which is one of the key issues we have. I mean, when it comes to changing over consumption patterns to more sufficient patterns, I mean, advertising is one way to change the representation and the social norms. But as advertising is currently backing business models that are based on overconsumption, I mean, we need again to break that that circle.
Thanks a lot, Yves, for your. Oh. I don't know if you finished because I still have a connection issue, I realize.
Yeah.
Were you finished, Yves? Because
yes.
yeah, I have a bit of a connection issue, sorry. Yeah, so thanks for that. I'm still seeing you speaking, so that's a little bit confusing. No, I guess I can just say that it's also our role to get out also of the climate and energy box. And we are actually doing this. I'll say you a word. We're actually starting to talk with social scientists in the framework of a Horizon 2020 project, which we've just launched, and I'll say a word about it there. And yeah, there's so much stuff that came from these citizens' conventions, not just in France, also in the UK and in Denmark. But yeah, let's see what governments have made of it. But definitely it looks like sometimes citizens are more ready than what governments think or want. Yamina, you have your camera on. Is it because you also want to react on this issue? Otherwise, I would take Leila Zipko's question. And I hope that everyone hears me well, because as I say, I still have not so good connection every time I want to speak. Okay.
No, it's okay. We can hear you, but Yamina turned
okay.
her camera off. So
okay, I didn't know whether that was real or that was just late or whatever. So I'm going to take Leila Zipka's question. I mean, I am not necessarily going to take it personally. I can just say that it's not an easy thing to make the link between very practical policies, particularly at the local level, and impacts, concrete impacts, even in scenario buildings. You have indicators as we described, but then the policy is something else. I don't know if Massa or Antoine, also from Fraunhofer, you would like to try and respond to this question, or if anyone else has an answer to give on this question of the effects of policies, whether they've been commented. I see that Yamina is raising her hand. Please go ahead, Yamina.
Yes, thank you. I think it's very important to to understand better what's happening at the local level from sufficiency perspective, because this is one of the gaps that we identified in the literature. So in terms of framing sufficiency, I think we should be in the next maximum 2 years, we should be quite good. But then this is theoretical framing of sufficiency. Where we are really not good at all is to understand what is going on at the local level and how to implement, what are the implications for individuals when these policies are implemented, and what are the resources that are needed to do this implementation. In terms of quantification, we are also much better than 10 years ago. So you will see quite soon some publications showing quantification of the lack of sufficiency, the impact of the lack of sufficiency measures on greenhouse gas emissions, but also how the contribution of sufficiency to climate mitigation. And we could do exactly the same exercise to energy emergency. So this, I think, is going to change quite fast, because from science perspective, there are plenty of group of peoples trying to work out, or sometimes I say that they are jumping on sufficiency concept, which is quite good. The only challenge that we have is that we are not, sufficiency is not, because it's an interdisciplinary approach that you need. So that's why it's not located anywhere at this stage. So we are quite jungling. We are quite in baby steps, even if sufficiency has 25 years, exists since 25 years in policy documents. I hope this answers a little bit your remark.
Mm. Yeah, I can also confirm that in our work, we're working on a European scenario that we'll publish some results for at the end of the year. I'll also say a word about it. We are looking for, we find a lot of best practices. We'll see if in the next session on the policies, maybe there will be something said about it. It's really hard to find actual return on investment, if I can say, to find actual figures. We're looking into this, and definitely, as Yamina said, there is interest, and everyone realizes that this is something we need also to make this convincing work. Antoine, did you put your camera on because you also would like to take this?
Yes, I just wanted to emphasize that indeed there's a kind of lack of sufficiency policies. So Martha could show that we have, of course, a lot of examples which are implemented, but they are implemented only on a local level usually, and also it's sometimes it's just pilot projects, so that are not really wide initiatives. And also because of that, it's a bit tricky to get a lot of evaluations and to get numbers. So it's a bit a chicken and egg issue that we have here. But I'm confident that with the time, we will have more and more information. And also, I think all I would say the traditional way to assess or evaluate policies might be a bit more complicated here. You mentioned the return on investment. If you are sometimes, if you have some policies where you just change your behavior, you have no investment. So that's why the ROI is pretty good, but it's not really always easy to evaluate the policies if you are looking at a sufficiency policy. Just wanted to stress that.
Thanks a lot, Antoine. I'm still trying to solve my connection issues, so I hope you still hear me well. Yamina raised her hand. Is this to answer the question from Emily Bankert? I'm not sure you can say much. I would be really happy for you to say much, but I don't know if you saw that question. What will this? How is sufficiency in the report that will be released on Monday?
This is under embargo, guys. However, I invite you to look at carefully this report. I do believe, and it's not because I am one of the authors, but I do really think that this report is going to be a game changer. But I cannot say more about the report. I wanted to come back to one point that I hear, because very often in the debate on sufficiency, people bring the behavior all the time. So the mainstream energy conservation policies are efficiency and behavior. there is now an increasing literature showing that the behavior economics and the behavior aspects was mainly introduced and pushed by fossil fuel companies, those who don't want to decarbonize, because this puts the responsibility on individuals. Sufficiency is about the opposite, actually, I would say, because it's about putting the responsibility, taking back the responsibility to the society. And that's why in the future we will be able to evaluate sufficiency. Or we already now, there are ways to methodologies to evaluate sufficiency measures. We just need to identify them. And that's why, for example, the database published by the German colleagues is very useful, because then you can look at all the sufficiency measures that are already in place and how they are labeled. The challenge that we will have from policy perspective is similar to the one we have in science. When I showed you this graph, it's a graph where you look, you search, you put as a keyword sufficiency, and then you have only few publications. To have more publications, in reality there are around 300 publications talking about sufficiency, but they don't use the word sufficiency. And you have exactly the same challenge from policy perspective. If you look at this database, the German database, so you see that there are plenty of policies that belongs to sufficiency, but not labeled at all as sufficiency. And you also have the same challenge in policy recommendations, in scenarios, etc. So one of our tasks is to identify, those who understand what sufficiency is about, is to identify all these measures and to feed this database and other databases. It does not matter if we have more databases, because we are just starting. There is nothing. We are starting from zero. We are starting really. We need to think that we are at zero level. So just build this capacity, and then we will analyze this and group the policies, and then they will be labeled as sufficiency measures. So we should not we should not narrow down sufficiency to the behavior of individuals, because sufficiency is about transformation, change, or metamorphosis of our societies, of the way our societies work. And this goes beyond, far beyond individual behavior. And individual behavior, what we know now is that individual behavior will occur, this is quantified now, will occur only if we offer to individuals the infrastructure that they need, that are needed for this behavior, that are required for the 1.5 degree target. So that's why, and really keep in mind that each time you talk about individual behavior, you are helping fossil fuel industry, and I think you will stop talking about individual behavior. Thanks.
Oh, thanks a lot for that very strong message, Yamina, which I can only endorse and push. And yeah, sufficiency is so much more than behavior. Yves, you also want to react. I don't know where. There are some questions for négaWatt that could also be answered in writing. And I'd also like to also let the other panelists intervene maybe on the question on the presentation.
Yeah, so maybe, well, first shortly about the questions by Véronique Tounoir, especially, which seems directed to négaWatt. I mean, can we do presentation in little cities that would be willing to have their citizens informed? Yes, we can, but I mean, our resources are limited, of course, and we are keen on trying to convey the kind of information and analysis we make to this local level for the reason Yamina just mentioned. I mean, this is where this changes could start in the kind of bottom-up dynamics, and when it comes to what regular citizens or people can do, I mean, there are plenty of things they can do, but as Yamina also emphasized, I mean, they could only change their behavior or their consumption patterns or anything if the infrastructures change to allow this to be a positive change. And this is why we've been talking for long at négaWatt about about sufficiency as a kind of supply side policy. I mean, it needs to come from those who create the conditions for consuming, who creates the conditions for living, meaning businesses and regulators at different levels. I mean, it's up to them to create the conditions for the deep changes that are needed. And I mean, we need more evidence, we need more database, but we also know that some policies deliver on such changes, and they've been delivering on a negative, in a negative way. We've had this yellow jersey crisis in France, which highlighted actually how decades of bad urban planning had increased, on one hand, increased distances that people need to cover to get to shops, to get to their job, and also increased their dependency on car as the only option to cover those distances. And when you develop such a situation and then want to put a tax on the fuel, then it's obviously, and for good reason, understood as something unfair on the individual side. So I mean, the same way we developed in France urban planning that increased energy consumption for basically the same kind of energy services, we could revert those tendencies. And I mean, yeah, we really can think of policies that deliver. We just need more return of experience to aggregate numbers and aggregate evidence to convey this message.
Thank you, Yves. I want to spread the words a little bit. I saw there's a comment from Charlene, who's actually our colleague on the assumptions. So, I mean, this would be a bit ambitious for us to go back to this and give you a detailed reply, but I still would like to give the floor back to Maria and Inga if you want, if you feel ready for it. I don't know if you have seen the question, but I could also ask you a question about the current context, which is changing things with the IEA making a 10-point plan with very, very concrete measures and everyone talking about cutting things very, very ambitiously. I wonder whether, had we done the work we've done together now or in a few months, so 1 year later, whether we would possibly go a little bit further into the ambitious of what is being done. But of course, as everyone said, this is also very much about infrastructure. So I don't know, Inga or Maria, could you give a bit of feedback on this?
Yeah, so maybe I will focus on the transport sector. So for the selected indicators, first of all, we analyzed the historical trends and we applied the econometric analysis looking for the future and take into account the social, economic and political content. So we analyzed what the policies are in place, what the policies are foreseen, and what the impact could they bring for example, for the public transport, because currently we have the financial support for updating our public transport in Lithuania. We also analyzed the city mobility plans, what we are thinking about the future, what are financial support for the infrastructure regarding the soft mobility, the bicycles and the pedestrian streets ways. Also, we take into account the currently ongoing project regarding Rail Baltic infrastructure project, which project will have really very big impact for the public transportation in Lithuania, because will be much more faster to go to some European capital cities by train instead of using the airplanes. So all those we take into consideration when we try to put the target or possible targets for 2050 for selected indicators.
Yes, I also could supplement Inga what we did in the project, that we applied this trend analysis as a strategy to forecast energy consumption changes by 2050. And energy consumption was a function of energy sufficiency indicators we identified in the project and energy consumption norms, which were taken as historical averages. And then these forecasts, as Inga mentioned, were supported by performed local socio-economical context.
Thanks to both for answering this. Maria, do you want to complete a little bit, but beware of time. I have seen one more question also, but we still have a bit of time.
Okay, just very quickly, we did very similar approach to LEIs. We're also projecting future evolution of the figures, but actually in case of the building sector, it's very important that some of the indicators cannot be really influenced, like the population growth, for example, and demographic changes play a very important role. The fact that the number of households is increasing, for example, it's quite difficult to influence. And just reflecting to one of the questions raised by the audience about behavior, I think that in some of the cases it's quite important, or it can be important in the future to apply some command and control policies. Like, for example, it was not mentioned by Massa, but in North Hamburg, as far as I know, they already forbid building single-family houses. Only multi-family houses can be built. Or there can be restrictions put on the size of newly built buildings, for example. So this is what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Yeah, indeed. I mean, this has been very much discussed and commented in Germany because people found this crazy, but indeed it is a policy that is strong, and you can probably design it in a way that makes it also more acceptable. And definitely a policy which is a strong sufficiency policy is about land use and regulating new construction and the new use of land, because this has also an impact on materials. So you go beyond, as Yamina was saying, beyond just the energy aspect of sufficiency. Yamina, you've got your hand raised. Does that have to do with the question that was answered by Yves on the GDP issue? I'm sure you have something to say about this, but maybe you have something to say about something else in the last few minutes we have.
Yeah, just one last point, actually, because we also hear very often that it's emissions are driven by population growth, but actually there is now scientific evidence showing that it's not the population growth, it's more the way of living, actually, the way we consume, the overconsumption of some and not the majority, that has led that leads to a greenhouse gas emission increase. So that's why the narratives as well needs to change from our side with the new scientific findings. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I don't see any other questions. I don't see any raised hands. This is very good news because it means we will be able to finish on time and leave time for those who want to continue talking about sufficiency and sufficiency policies to join the other event that is coming. Yeah, so maybe Mathilde, you can go back to the slides. Oh, Yamina still has raised her hand, so I saw Yves. Are there last comments you would like to raise, Yves, before I conclude?
No, it's legacy, sorry. I'm not very good with the tool.
And Yves?
Yeah, very short, but I mean, I don't want to take too much time. I mean, what Yamina said about the very unequal level of consumption and therefore the very uneven level of contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is also a reason why we think of sufficiency in terms of this donut economy and in terms of corridors of lifestyles or corridors of consumption levels or access to energy services to think of on the international level. I mean, reducing our energy and resources demand in developed countries is obviously a way to allow for meeting much better the need of access to even vital energy services in the south. So, I mean, putting this issue in international perspective also helps to understand why we need to decrease, because I mean one of the main drivers of the increase of greenhouse gas emissions right now is the fact that hundreds of millions of people in China or India are just trying to catch up on our lifestyles, and it's just not sustainable. Yeah, so and this is also a reason why we were so much interested in that discussion on the European level already on these corridors and how they could be implemented. And I just want to say that discussing with colleagues and thinking of national context like in Hungary and Lithuania also brings us to rethink the way we see targets in terms of sufficiency in a country like France, and probably think of still getting them down compared to what we've done already, for that sake of putting everyone in these corridors.
Yeah, thanks, Yves. And that's also why we wanted to have this in the framework of the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue, which is this big international event. And we really feel that what we've started doing with CACTUS has a relevance beyond Europe. I don't see that many names that don't look European in the chat, but I also suppose the ones who were really attending everything this week may have been tired, but we're happy with given the issue visibility. And I can sense that there may be more visibility from it also from Monday on. We're also next week, we're discussing with the IP, the International Pathways platform. So this is a little bit coming up on the international agenda too. We really need to conclude. I had one next slide, which I don't need to really go into detail on. We've discussed this so much. We really see now that sufficiency is coming on the EU agenda, not in the nicest context, in a bit of a sad and dramatic context, but nevertheless, it's getting attention, and there are discussions also, we're involved far away with discussions also with the European Commission on this. So things may be moving, we hope, on this, despite the sad context. But in the next slide, I saw one animation here, so you've heard everything about this. I just wanted to quickly give you in 2 minutes an overview of what is coming next. Also from CACTUS, there were questions you want to see more about the assumptions, what we've done. We will publish a report in April on the modeling, so the integration of these assumptions into modeling and also the impact, so reflection on how do we do this in the context of models and scenario models which are not necessarily fit for purpose. We'll also publish national policy briefs for Hungary and Lithuania in May. That will integrate quite a lot, and we'll be at ECEEE in June presenting a paper which is very much based on this and looking at a bit more technical stuff. The next point I want to tell you about, I've mentioned it, we're part of a European scenario. We're actually leading a scenario which will soon be called CLEVER, a collaborative low energy vision for Europe to bridge the climate and sustainability gaps through sufficiency, efficiency, and renewables. You'll find more about this on our website, but little by little we'll be able to send you results in the coming months and especially at the end of the year. And we really hope to put the issue on the European agenda with this report. We're also part of this Fulfill report, project, which is an H2020 project. And this is what I mentioned with the link with social sciences. We're putting you all the links in the chat. You can use them. You can take a look at this. It's 11:30. So the most urgent thing is for me to tell you that you can rush and click on the last link because this is our friends from ENSU, who are also part of the 2 other projects, European Scenario and Fulfill, at least the Wuppertal, who have an event just now, which is also a Data Decide event on a policy database on energy sufficiency, which is about to be published. And there will be also an interesting literature review by Fulfill to be published by the summer. So I'm saying thank you to you with the next slide for a beautiful future. No, I'm actually also joking. This is not the future we want. The future we want is the next slide. And I'm saying bye to you, wishing you a happy Easter, a happy Ramadan. We hope that the spring will come back And we hope to see you soon with CACTUS or with the other projects, and to hear more about you very, very soon. Bye-bye, have a nice day, and see you on the other link for those who want to do this. Bye-bye.